Reddit lawyers. What case made you ashamed of the people involved in the court? Story 1. Lawyer ashamed of client who secretly filmed ex-wife's drunken behavior. Family lawyer here. The clients are the worst part of family law because you see them in their worst moments during a very difficult time in their lives. Having said that, I certainly wasn't rooting for this one client who videotaped his ex-wife without her knowledge when she would get drunk to use her behavior against her, which just rubbed me the wrong way. He was also very pompous, snobby, yet would send rambling emails with numerous spelling and grammar mistakes. He just grossed me out. I had a client in a custody case that initially I thought had a great case against her ex, but as the case went on, I believe her behavior was potentially more harmful toward the children than the ex. Borderline Munchausen by proxy. Story 2. Lawyer refused case of client planning to kidnap grandchildren for religious reasons. My desire to maintain a good reputation with the court and my own moral compass prevented me from taking on clients I found truly awful, but this was the most disturbing. Identifying details changed. Trigger warning for child abuse. Prospective client PC had severe mental health concerns. They were also from a heavily religious family who lived in a different state. Several years prior to this incident, they had moved to our state and had 2 children with a person not from their parents' church. They were untreated, but in remission the entire time, and their former partner did not know about their illness. Within a few years of the youngest being born, they and their former partner broke up amicably and were co-parenting successfully. While their former partner was out of the area on a business trip, they had a breakdown. Highly likely substances were also involved here, locked the older child in the closet of the apartment, and tried to harm the younger one. When the police showed up, neighbors called. They were in a full-blown delusional state. They ended up in the state hospital for multiple months, plead guilty but insane on the criminal charges, and their parents took them back to their home state for supervised treatment. Co-parent/former partner got a protective order for the children, and later full custody at a hearing PC didn't attend, because still in custody and fully delusional. Fast forward 8-ish years, and PC shows up in my office, grandparents in tow, because PC is medically stable, by which I mean medicated to the gills, and likely as a result of this is now fully under the grandparents' control. Anyway, the grandparents were insistent on getting back the kids, who PC has not seen or communicated with since the incident. PC/grandparents were doing this because children need their parent, and their other parent is living in sin, with tattoos and an unmarried partner in the house. The plan was to have PC move to our state temporarily, because no court would move a child out of state when the child and the stable parent are in state, with no support system, no medical insurance, no continuity of medical care, get custody, and then secretly move the kids back to grandparents' state. Grandparents were confident that once PC and grandkids moved home, their home judges would approve of it, because we know each other from the church, it'll work out. When I told them the law does not work that way, and PC would be highly likely to be charged with custodial interference and possibly child endangerment if they tried, they became angry and started to argue with me. When I gently told them it was time to leave, they flounced out the door yelling about how they were going to talk to someone who knows what they're doing, not some idiot like me. I checked the court dockets for a while after that, but thankfully never saw anything come of it, so I'm assuming all the Dom/Rel attorneys in town said no, and they finally realized what a terrible idea this was. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 3. Lawyer disgusted by client who fought for dog, then surrendered it to shelter. I did have a case where my client fought really hard for the dog and then ended up turning him over to a shelter. Fucking jerk. The ex-wife received an anonymous tip and was able to get him back quickly. Other than that, it isn't usually a client that's bad. Also, if they are, you can just fire them. Typically, it's the opposing counsel/self-represented opposing. Story 4. Lawyer embarrassed by client's delusion of being Nicholas Sparks' fiancé. Story time. I had a bar referral call my office one day, and it was a nice woman who was almost in tears. Once I calmed her down and was able to ask her how I could help, she explained to me that someone had emptied her bank account and forced her to sign a contract saying that she would marry a stranger. I was beyond confused, but being a young attorney and wanting to help, I decided to get more detail from her. I asked for more information, and what followed was one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard. So this woman claimed to be Nicholas Sparks's girlfriend. You know, the guy that wrote the Notebook and Dear John? Well, she is going on and on about how they're in love, and how she was going to go to a convention being held in his honor with him. Supposedly she wasn't able to be his date, however, because he had to be single and appear desirable to other women. In order to preserve the illusion that he was single, she reached out to a matchmaking company to get a date for the convention. She signed some paperwork with them and said she gave them her credit card. When she got home, she read the paperwork and realized that she had signed up to marry a stranger for $10,000, and that Nicholas was going to be so mad at her. I began to realize during the course of the conversation that something was likely wrong with this woman's mental health, and I mean that in the most respectful way I can say it. She couldn't stay on a single train of thought. She kept making numerous outrageous claims about herself and her life, and the thoughts she did complete were riddled with inconsistencies. Here are a few choice selections. 1. Nicholas Sparks wrote Dear John about her and her husband, and that was how they met. She claimed he died in the war, which isn't how the story even goes. Later, she said she wasn't and never had been married. 2. She claimed that her father had programmed the first computer in Ohio in the 60s, and that she had written the language for him. He took all the credit because he was an adult, and nobody would take her seriously at her age. 3. That the internet used to be able to teach you anything back in the day, including martial arts, psychology, and the future. It didn't work anymore due to 9/11, because the terrorists sabotaged all the programs. After about 10 minutes of trying to figure out if this poor woman had been defrauded by a company, a man takes the phone from her, puts it on speakerphone, and introduces himself as her best friend and caretaker. She says that he is who he says he is, and tells me that he's an FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. He asks if we can speak alone. I say yes, and he takes the phone from her. He explains to me that the woman I have been speaking to is a diagnosed schizophrenic, that he actually is her caretaker, and that he isn't an FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. He tells me he's so sorry she's been wasting my time, and explains what's going on. Apparently, this poor woman has been suffering from the delusion that she is Nicholas Sparks's fiancé after seeing the movie Dear John. She'd apparently believed that delusion for a number of years. Recently, she decided that she needed to go to the Nicholas Sparks convention and had to have a date, so she contacted a matchmaking company. The company hadn't signed her off to marry anyone, which is impossible, and had instead set her up with 10 different men that could take her on dates. She did spend $2,000, not $10,000 like she claimed to me on the phone, which was a waste of her savings, but there wasn't any fraud. It's just a poor, mentally incapacitated woman who was hopelessly confused and upset. I can honestly say that it was the weirdest call I've ever gotten. It was a mix of confusing, hilarious, and sad. Story 5. Lawyer discovers client broke into neighbor's house. I have another one that I've just remembered. Representing a guy accused of housebreaking. Managed to persuade the prosecutor that they couldn't prove it, so they dropped the case at the intermediate diet procedural hearing before the case called in court. Headed downstairs to the cells to break the good news to my client, who was remanded in custody. Have an idle glance at the details of the charge while I'm waiting for the cell's staff to bring him out. The house that was broken into was my, then, next-door neighbor. Client was delighted that he was getting out. Him. Aw, cheers pal, you're the man. Can't wait. TAE, get out. Me? No bother, right? See that place you definitely didn't break into? I live next door, so gonna leave my house and car alone, please? Him. I sure, pal. Me and the boys go up there stealing all the time. "What car do you drive?" I told him what kind of car it was. Needless to say, my car was broken into about 3 weeks later. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 6. Lawyer embarrassed when client wears incriminating jacket to court. Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a substance possession case. Substances found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing, Guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him, while wearing the jacket in question, the exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Story 7. Lawyer ashamed when ex forgets reason for restraining order in court. My ex forgot why she was in court. Not a lawyer, but fully 2 years after we dated, a crazy ex got a restraining order on me as revenge for saying her tattoos sucked. She said I'd sexually assaulted her and threatened her. We go to court. She tells her side. Judge picks at a couple holes in her story, then asks her, per the law on restraining orders, how she feels I am a threat to her safety, security, and privacy. Nobody should be able to say that about my tattoos. The fucking idiot just finished saying I was a crazed sexual predator, and then completely forgot. Story 8. Lawyer embarrassed by client's ignorance claim during cross-examination. I read a book once, and it was a story about lawyers and their cases. It was years ago, so I will try to recall one that sticks out. A lawyer was questioning a guy that assaulted someone at work. He was a dock worker. Lawyer: so the person you assaulted said it started with you calling him a curse word. Guy: I did not call him a curse word. I do not even know that word meant. Lawyer: you do not know what that word meant. Don't you work on the docks? Guy: did not know what it meant, so he is lying. Lawyer: are you saying you do not know or have heard the word curse word before? Guy: that's right, but I know what it is now. My lawyer had to explain it to me. Lawyer: are you telling me you did not know what a curse word was until you met your lawyer? Story 9. Lawyer shamed by defendant raising hand to identify himself. Reposting myself from years ago. Story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charged dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facepalmed on that one. Story 10. Lawyer embarrassed when client reveals flight risk in bail hearing. Sat in the public gallery at a bail hearing for a man accused of heinous crimes against a very, very young female relative. The judge started laying out the conditions of bail, and one of them was to surrender his passport. Man turned to his attorney and said, loudly, words to the effect of, "But you said I could fly back to my home country." The judge stopped himself and revoked the man's bail. Edit. This post brought to you by the words, flight and risk. Also, his home country was out of reach of extradition. Edit. Again. This was not in the USA, United States of America. Every country has foreigners. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 11. Lawyer embarrassed by client faking disability while playing in lingerie football league. I had a client who claimed she was discriminated against by her employer due to disabilities she sustained after a car crash. She said her disabilities were so bad she couldn't drive or sit at her desk for any amount of time, and her company refused to accommodate her by letting her work remotely. Needless to say, it was embarrassing when opposing counsel told me my client played in a full-contact lingerie football league and had telecast videos of her on YouTube, playing, running, getting tackled, and dancing in the end zone, on the very date her doctor, who lost his license, gave her a note saying she was bedbound. Story 12. Lawyer regrets winning custody for father suspected of molesting children. My father is a lawyer. I asked him once why he didn't do family law anymore. He told me about a case where he was able to get a father full custody of his children, but by the end of the case my father wasn't convinced that his client wasn't molesting the children. Story 13. French lawyer discovers client's guilt in wife's murder and child abuse after emotional defense. A French lawyer wrote a piece on a long case where he had to defend the victim's husband charged with the murder of his wife. Believing his client, he worked 200% and found enough small faults in the evidence to cast doubt. So involved in the defense, he wept while pleading. The verdict hit him hard as the husband got a long-time prison sentence, but then the husband smiled, saying, "Well, 20 years is low considering what I did, that's all right." This isn't the last time they'll have to see each other's in court, though. For those who'd still like to read an 8-page story in French, http://mytrimo.fr/o-get-apens/ps. 8 pages might look long, but I kept the most interesting part out. I had no regret spending time reading them all. Edit. I hope I won't lose too much in my translation. The husband is sentenced to 20 years. 7 years later, police calls the lawyer asking for his presence because the husband is being charged with child abuse. He finds confusing to be charged with child abuse while still being in prison, and assumes the father took advantage of them during family visits. When he finally meets his client again, the prisoner confesses that couple problems lead him to start doing bad things more and more often, until his wife caught him and used this to blackmail him into not divorcing so she could enjoy his money. After a long time he couldn't take it, and that's how he ended up in the first trial. Now the molestation has been revealed, and he's facing a new one for fact, older than his wife's murder. The lawyer agreed to take him as client. He was sentenced for 15 years. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 14. Lawyer humiliated in court over mispronouncing tibula bone. Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he's ever treated a tibula fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. After about 6-7 questions, she asks, "How did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibula fracture?" And begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him, to which he simply responds, "There is no bone named the tibula." The lawyer became beet red and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. Story 15. Judge yells at new lawyer for plea form mistake to teach others. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom in a petition for a restraining order against boyfriend/dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody support, etc. But today's hearing was just on the restraining order. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse." To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. We play the voicemail, and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming stuff like, "I should have fucking killed you when we were together." I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private, he told me, "Sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain, but if you noticed, they all fixed their own forms, and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school?" After that, he invited me into his office for coffee and gave some really good life/work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 16. Client threatens ex in court with microphone still on. In court for a restraining order, my ex was adamant he had not nearly killed our daughter, and that he did not in fact break into my house and point a gun at me the week prior. I was just a liar who wanted to keep his child away. When told I was asking for a full and definite order, which is zero contact ever, he said to his lawyer, "If this jerk gets that order, I'm going back to her house and I won't fail this time." Sadly for him, his microphone was still on. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 17. Client refuses plea deal and gets harsher sentence from jury. I work in forensic psychiatry. One of the factors we consider when deciding if someone is ready to go back to court is the ability to take information and process it rationally. We normally do this by making up hypothetical plea deals to see if they can make a reasonable choice based on the hypothetical information from their lawyer. This guy would have failed that test. Now, being staunchly against taking a plea deal doesn't mean someone is incompetent, and we will keep them longer. It's just one of the factors we consider. Just for some context, he was looking at a mandatory 5 years due to his prior convictions. On a first offense, he probably would have gotten 7-9 months from a judge. In my state, juries impose sentences if you opt for a jury trial. After they found him guilty, they heard about his prior record before sentencing. It's an easy argument for the prosecutor at that point. Career substance dealer, not willing to reform, danger to the community, etc. Story 18. Father's lawyer exposed for ignorance in custody hearing. I had a family client whose ex wasn't letting him see his kid. So we were in court with him, explaining how important parenting was to him, how much he loved being a father, etc. After 45 minutes of this, the mother says, "I don't know why he's saying this. He abandoned his other kids. Shum and cue me, who has never heard him mention having other kids. Please give your lawyers important information, especially if another party involved knows your secrets. I have a part-time job as a court bailiff and hate standing in court for these." In a recent case, the father was arguing that he wanted additional visitation and joint custody, which had previously been granted solely to the mother. The judge asked the father a whole host of questions about his kid. Who is his teacher? Who is the school principal? Who is his pediatrician? When was the last time he went to the doctor? Dude didn't know anything, but said it was because the mother hadn't told him. Mother knew all answers and had text messages to prove that she'd offered any and all information to the father, and he responded by cursing her out, telling her not to text him unless he asks a question about the kid. Not only did he not get joint custody, his visitation was reduced to whatever the mother wanted, since he admitted that he refused to give their kid a prescribed medication when he had him because the father had decided he didn't need it, so he'd just throw it away, causing the mother to have to get more if she sent it with her son. Story 19. Client sues ex for custody of cats and absurd compensation. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently this pissed off his ex-girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend sued him for custody of their 2 cats, and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats, because she claimed they were service animals. Hint, they were not at all service animals. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of attention. So to add to the story, one of the reasons my friend broke up with the ex-girlfriend was because she had problems caring for the cats, ignoring them, forgetting to feed them while my friend was away, etc. So her coming back for the cats was clearly all about the fact that my friend was suddenly engaged to someone else. When they went to court, the judge immediately threw out the $500,000 demand because it was ridiculous. Unfortunately, they were awarded joint custody of the cats, which was this woman's way of staying in my friend's life, so he decided it was better if he just gave her the cats, so he could be free of her. Story 20. Client caught faking injury by private investigator video. Anyway, just before the statute of limitations ran out, I get served, and the guy is claiming he's been injured since the accident. He can't work, he can't walk, can't have intimacy with his wife, the whole nine. He wants $250,000, the entirety of my policy, for his pain and suffering. We go to the deposition, and it comes to light that the guy owned his own flooring business for 20 years. Retired down to Florida, things didn't work out, and he moved back to work again, or at least he was until the accident. I ask for his story, and he tells me it all started 20 years ago. My lawyer says his injuries are obviously degenerative from decades of manual labor, and decides to hire a private investigator to follow him around. Sure as crap, they catch him on video working and lifting heavy machinery out of his truck like nothing ever happened. Insurance gave him $10,000 because it would have been cheaper than paying a lawyer at trial. To this day, I'm still salty he walked away with cash for that garbage. Story 21. Embarrassed by client's unexpected drug admission during cross-examination. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's substance use. So opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use heroin and crack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause, and the defendant said, "Yes, I do both of those substances." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. Story 22. Shamed by client's inappropriate outburst in court. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation. Without giving details, he was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I am taking notes about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned, and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh. Story 23. Embarrassed by client's damaging testimony, contradicting earlier statements. I was representing a plaintiff in a hit-and-run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway, and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The "oh crap" moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object, because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel showed the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident, when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh. Crap. Story 24. Shamed by client's inappropriate sexual admission in court. Represented a woman charged with multiple very serious felonies. She insisted that in the months before the offense, she'd been seriously dating one of the detectives who ultimately wound up investigating and testifying in her case. For a variety of reasons, I trusted this client and believed her, even though the detective never disclosed the relationship in his report. So during his testimony, I ask, "Detective Smith, you had a romantic relationship with Ms. Defendant, correct?" He goes, "What?" "No," and is visibly offended. The judge eye looks at me like I've lost my mind. The Commonwealth attorney audibly says, "What?" I'm freaking out, because a large part of my cross and argument was focused on the bias formed by the prior relationship. And now I've got nothing, and I've lost all credibility. I try again. "Detective Smith, have you had a physical relationship with Ms. Defendant?" As the Commonwealth rises to object, and the judge starts to scold me, the detective goes, "Oh yay, we've had a physical intimacy, It just wasn't very romantic. Edit/update. State is Virginia. The jury acquitted my client of the relatively minor charge that the detective in my story was involved with, but convicted of the other, much more serious charges the detective had nothing to do with. There was a confession and video on the serious charges, so it was kind of a no-brainer. Sorry, I'm being kind of intentionally vague. There are no confidentiality concerns since this all happened in open court, but it's distasteful to give out too much information about a client. The detective was not disqualified. His testimony was not thrown out. Impeachment, no matter how good, doesn't. Story 25. Embarrassment of discovering client-targeted neighbor's home. I have another one that I've just remembered. Representing a guy accused of housebreaking. Managed to persuade the prosecutor that they couldn't prove it, so they dropped the case at the intermediate diet, procedural hearing, before the case called in court. Headed downstairs to the cells to break the good news to my client, who was remanded in custody. Have an idle glance at the details of the charge, while I'm waiting for the cell's staff to bring him out. The house that was broken into was my then next-door neighbor. Client was delighted that he was getting out. Him, "Aw, cheers, pal, you're the man." Kenny, "Wait, TAE, get out." Me, "No bother, right? See that place you definitely didn't break into? I live next door, so gonna leave my house and car alone, please?" Him, "Aye, sure, pal." Mean, "The boys go up there stealing all the time. What car do you drive?" I told him what kind of car it was. Needless to say, my car was broken into about 3 weeks later. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 26. Shame of client undermining defense by wearing incriminating jacket. Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a substance possession case. Substances found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing, guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him, while wearing the jacket in question, the exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Story 27. Client's outrageous demand for organic dog food on food stamps leads to discrimination claims. I made an account just to share this story. We interviewed a middle-aged man who was poor and received food stamp assistance for himself. He had an emotional support dog, some kind of toy breed, who was untrained and most likely just his pet. According to him, the dog could only eat expensive organic whole foods and could not eat ordinary dog food. He applied for what basically amounts to food stamp assistance for his dog. The state granted the food stamp assistance for the dog. He came to us outraged because the amount of food stamp money he got for the dog did not allow him to buy the organic whole foods that the dog required. He wanted to appeal the food stamp decision and get even more money. We turned the case down. This resulted in claims of disability discrimination against everyone in the office who interacted with him. Story 28. Woman sues ex for allegedly stealing cat based on cigarette smell evidence. A woman wanted to charge her ex for stealing her indoor/outdoor cat. The cat had been gone for 2 days. When it returned, it smelled like cigarette smoke. Her ex was a smoker, so she thought this was plenty of evidence against him. Story 29. Mother dresses like a schoolgirl and prioritizes pedophile boyfriend over daughter. I represent mom of daughter. Mom's boyfriend did a bunch of grooming behavior, including buying the daughter a lipstick vibrator and lube. I recall the daughter was 12 or 13 at the time. The mother completely and utterly stood by her man and didn't care if it cost her custody of her daughter. Social services intervened. The child was removed and placed into custody of bio father. She retained me when bio father filed to terminate child support and have his own child support established. The woman was in her late 40s and wore ponytails on each side or her head. and/or braids on each side of her head, and had them decorated like little girls have. She also wore, almost constantly, what appeared to be a Catholic schoolgirl outfit: tartan skirt, white shirt, low cut, and vest. It was as if she was trying to look like a little girl. I found her and her pedo boyfriend completely cringy. Story 30. Client repeatedly sues lawyer with handwritten frivolous lawsuits after tax dispute. I defend corporations that fail to pay taxes. A company failed to pay millions in excise taxes. They blamed it on another newer company that came in as competition to their monopoly on a very narrow niche industry within a broader industry. The pres of this corp sues the new company for hurting his business. I told him it wouldn't work and wouldn't find a lawyer to do it. He hand-wrote his lawsuit, and it was thrown out because it was frivolous. As for my case, I saved him just over $1 million with the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, in trust fund assessments. He is now on his third attempt to sue me for not saving him more money. The previous 2 attempts failed because 1. I have an arbitration clause. 2. His company is now defunct. And 3. I performed our contract to the letter. He handwrote those lawsuits too. He is essentially harassing me with lawsuits because he has nothing better to do now. I will smash him like a bug in court again, and round we go. Story 31. Lawyer disgusted by client's attempt to claim half of Holocaust survivors' settlement. This never made it to court. I asked my divorce lawyer what was the worst thing a client had asked him to argue. I was expecting a "I want the salad spinner" sort of story. He had a client, a professor in his 70s, who was divorcing from his wife, also a professor in her 70s. They were both Jewish. His wife had a tattoo on her arm. It was a number, put there by the Nazis when they put her in a concentration camp in World War II as a child. Husband was born in the U.S., United States, was not German. The German government was in the process of settling a case with the survivors. She had some amount of money, a 6-figure sum, due to her. The husband wanted his lawyer to argue that he should get half the settlement money. Lawyer told him that there was a special circle in hell for lawyers who asked for stuff like that, and that he was not planning on ending up there. Story 32. Prosecutor ashamed of defending rapist father's blame on child's clothing. Prosecutor here. Had a case where a man raped his 6-year-old daughter because she wore suggestive clothing and seemed to be asking for it. He tried to argue that, girls are just sexually active at a younger age now. I remember thinking, what would Dexter do? Anyway, man got convicted and is now serving 2 life sentences plus 100 years. Edit. The reason for that sentence is that he will not be eligible for parole. He was convicted of 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of incest, and 2 counts of aggravated child molestation. In my jurisdiction, you're eligible for parole on a life sentence after 30 years. Life and life without parole are 2 different sentences. Here, he was not eligible for life without parole. So in theory at least, yes, he could serve 2 consecutive life sentences, which would be 60 years, and then parole. Now, however, we are certain he never draws another breath as a free man. I've done several of these cases, and to me they're much harder than murder cases because of the pressure. In this case, the man had no other complaints than this as a father. So if I lost, the poor girl goes back to rapist dad. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 33. Lawyer embarrassed by client's defense in child sexual abuse case. Several years ago, I was junior counsel in a prosecution in which the state alleged the 30-year-old male accused sexually penetrated his 13-year-old foster daughter. Part of the state case relied on SMS, short message service, messages allegedly sent by this gentleman to the complainant. Some of them were pretty bad. I won't repeat them. But there were some which amounted to, "Sorry, I thought you liked it when I did X." Defense counsel conceded that if he did send those messages, that it would have been very inappropriate. Later, during closing argument, defense counsel argued, Surely it would have been more appropriate if he wrote, "You have lovely breasts," or, "I want you to have my children," to your 13 years old foster child, while in the same house you share with your wife? You're right. That's way better. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 34. Lawyer disgusted by husband's implied consent argument in abuse case. In family court hearing a motion for entry of a restraining order for an abusive husband. Husband's lawyer argues that, in a marriage, there is implied consent for a certain amount of abuse/violence. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. Story 35. Lawyer ashamed of representing firm offering low settlement due to elderly client's expected death. Not a lawyer. Did work experience with one back in high school. He had to go speak to someone in the court cells, where I wasn't allowed, so I went and sat in one of the courtrooms while he did that. There were a few cases, but the one that stood out were the two guys who both had some injuries and claimed the other one had attacked them unprovoked. Neither wanted any representation. There was no evidence apart from them blaming each other, and when the lawyer I was with came to find me, they were literally just stood in front on the judge screaming, "He did it! No, he did it!" over and over again. Story 36. Lawyer's client stands up during opposing counsel's closing argument. During closing argument, when opposing counsel said what I told my client she was going to say and stressed that my client needed to make no movements, gestures, facial expressions, etc. because it was the best part of opposing counsel's case, my client literally stood up and said, "Yes, exactly. That's true," because for some reason she thought it did entitle her to do what she'd done. Complete and total foobar. Story 37. New lawyer misrepresents case facts in court, faces judge's rebuke. I was an associate doing adoptions for a partner when he came into my office, saying he needed an ex parte order. I had never seen the case file, but it was on an uncontested adoption, and he told me that ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, and the Sailors and Soldiers Civil Relief Act did not apply. Ex parte started about 20 minutes before he came into my office. I grabbed the file, sprinted about a mile to the courthouse, got through security, and ran up to the ex parte rooms covered in sweat. They were on the last case of the day, so I had just barely made it. The clerk was trying not to laugh at me and took the proposed order and background. My butt just brushed the bench when I was called up. I gave my spiel about the order and the background, and then, the Indian Child Welfare Act and Sailors and Soldiers Civil Relief Act does not apply. The commissioner looks at some of the documents and says, "There's a statement from the birth mother that she's an enrolled tribal member and participates in tribal ceremonies. Doesn't that mean ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, does apply?" I took maybe 2 beats standing there with my gob hanging open before I say, "You're correct, Your Honor. I was not aware of that statement." "Well, I'm not going to sign this order today. You can come back when you're a little less confused about the facts of your case." Smirks from the other lawyers. Then I got chewed out by the partner for not reading the file before presenting the order. Story 38. Client's drug use confession sinks disability case. I've had quite a few doing Social Security disability. Typically speaking, it's people who have gone back to work and didn't tell me, or that all of a sudden remember they actually volunteer 40 hours a week once they're under oath. But the most memorable one was the guy who was being questioned by the judge about his marijuana usage, which was noted in his records, and after being asked if he used any other substances, starts listing off meth, heroin, coke, etc. Pretty much you name it, he'd done it, and then informed us all that he had last used about a month prior. That was a denial I didn't appeal, and a real interesting call with his mom when she called me super pissed about him getting denied and me recommending not to appeal it. The judge had actually done him a solid and completely left out all of the hardcore substance use in the decision, so it wouldn't be an issue for him in the future if he got clean and tried again. But that made his mom think that the judge had clearly denied him based on nonsense, as he had only mentioned the alcohol and weed. Story 39. Defendant's inappropriate behavior shocks court during trial. Defendant was drunk 80 years old, hitting on the 18 to 19 years old jurors during recess, while his lawyer frantically told him to stop and bodily blocked him from touching them in the elevator after he'd cornered one. Story 40: Client's murder case doomed by overwhelming evidence and arrogance. Client was on trial for murder 1, and O.J. Orenthal James Simpson's case looked like a plot from Suits compared to this. Nobody has ever been worse at crime in the history of crime. We were appointed counsel, which means we're private employees who sort of offer to be on standby when they run out of public defenders. We were his fifth. He'd fired the 4 prior because they kept telling him to just get started on the life sentence because this was already over. They were right. My client was on trial because he executed his girlfriend with a pair of gunshots. He did it because she'd secretly aborted a pregnancy that might have been his. He found out when he picked her up at the clinic. As they drove home, both of them live texted their hour of conversation, including all of threats to kill her for this when they got home, which he did. My client's apartment building had recently upgraded to full-color, telescopic 4K, 4,000 pixel security cameras. We think he didn't know the upgrade had closed the blind spots. Stuff looked like film from the Super Bowl. My client was also the only 6'4" Hispanic man with bright red hair and a taste for rare, designer sneakers that I and his victim had ever met. This makes it difficult to argue it is not him. While the prosecution plays his Gotham City highlight reel on a projector, my client not only shot her with his own gun, he brought his phone with him while he drove out to the remote spot where it was found. My client also texted his friend to buy him the next one-way ticket to different country, no questions asked. He made sure to give him his credit card to buy it though, 'cause we can't leave our homies on the hook for that bill. Finally, my friend client had. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.